Hey, and welcome back to Beyond the IEP with Dr. D. Today's topic is still related to special education, but it's going to be going beyond the IEP for sure. Have you heard people say that the moving or restructuring of the Department of Education really wouldn't be a big deal? And maybe you even thought that yourself. And honestly, that is a fair question. Because on the surface, it can sound just like another government change. But here's the problem. For millions of students, especially students with disabilities, this just is not a policy shift. It could directly affect whether they receive services that they're entitled to. So today I want to talk about this clearly. I want to walk you through this without politics and without jargon and just talk about the real world impact on students, families, and schools. You know, I often hear people say, well, why do we need the Department of Education? It's just another government agency. So let's start with that simple question. What does the Department of Education actually do? Because a lot of people assume it runs schools, and this is people who are assuming without the facts. It doesn't run schools. Your local schools are run by your state and your district. The Department of Education does something totally different and incredibly important. It makes sure that federal education laws are followed. It distributes funding to support those schools, and it protects students' rights. And one of the biggest laws it oversees is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that's the law that guarantees that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education. So let's talk about why this matters. As you know, special education is not optional. It is a legal right. And under federal law, students are entitled to something called FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. That means that schools are required to provide things such as individualized instruction, support services like speech or occupational therapy, and accommodations to help students with disabilities succeed in school. But here's the key. These rights do not enforce themselves. There has to be a system or a mechanism in place that ensures that schools are following the law. That's where federal oversight comes in from the Department of Education. So what happens if the Department of Education is moved or it's absorbed into another agency? So let's walk through this practically, not politically. First, education could lose priority. Instead of being the central focus, it becomes one responsibility among many others. Second, enforcement could weaken. And families may have fewer protections for their children if the school doesn't follow the law. Third, services could become inconsistent. And some states maintain strong systems that are in place, while others are struggling. And that means a child's support could depend on where they live. And finally, funding could become less stable. And that directly impacts the services that schools can provide. So let's bring this down to a real-world example. I want you to imagine a child with autism. That child might need speech therapy, they might need structured support, they may need specific classroom accommodations. And right now, if those services are not provided, families have legal recourse. They have a system that supports their advocacy. But if oversight weakens, that same family with that child with autism could face delays, limited access to services, or fewer options to challenge decisions that are made. And that changes everything. Because for these students, support is not extra, it is essential. So let's clear up a few common ideas that you might hear. You could hear states can handle it on their own. And yes, states do play a huge role, but federal law ensures consistency and fairness across all states. You might hear, oh, this is not going to affect any students. There are over 7 million students in the United States who receive special education services. That is not a small number. And you might hear, oh, it's just a bureaucracy. But for families, the system is protection for their child. It is accountability for their child, and it is access. If you don't have a child in special education, this still matters because it affects classrooms, it affects teachers, and it affects how schools support all learners. And ultimately, it reflects how we care for our most vulnerable students. Strong systems do not happen by accident. They happen through structure, oversight, and accountability. So when we talk about moving or restructuring the Department of Education, we have to ask better questions. Who benefits from that? Who might lose support? And what happens to the students who rely on these services the most? Because at the end of the day, this isn't about politics. It's about protection. It's about access. It's about making sure that every student has the opportunity to succeed. Hopefully this allowed me to clarify some things that you may have heard out there. Share it with someone who's trying to understand this issue, because informed conversations lead to better decisions for all students. Now, some people may disagree with what I've had to say, but I always hear people say, that's what makes America great. And plus, I'm the mayor and governor of my own YouTube channel, so I can post whatever I want to. Please like and subscribe for more further special education topics.